HOA Karen gave Black Man's Lake cabin to her son, so he fenced it right to their head office. James had always dreamed of having a peaceful life, away from the noise and stress of the city. After years of hard work and sacrifices, he finally saved enough money to buy a cabin by a beautiful lake. The cabin was everything he had hoped for, a place to relax, to feel free, and to enjoy nature. It became his escape from the busy world, a sanctuary where he could recharge his mind and body. The small town near the cabin was quiet and friendly. James loved it there. The neighbors were mostly families, people who had lived in the area for many years. The most powerful figure in the neighborhood was Karen, the president of the Homeowners Association, HOA. She was a strong-willed woman who had been in charge for a long time. Her job was to make sure everyone followed the rules of the neighborhood, which, in her mind, gave her the right to control many aspects of the residents' lives. James didn't mind the HOA's rules. He understood that they were there to keep the neighborhood nice and orderly. However, he never expected that one day, the HOA would cause him so much trouble. Karen, in particular, seemed to have a habit of overstepping her authority. She was strict, sometimes too strict, but no one ever challenged her. She ran the HOA with an iron fist, and most of the residents kept quiet, either out of fear or simply because they didn't want to make waves. Everything seemed fine until James came back from a short vacation. He had been away for just a few days, taking a much-needed break from the grind. When he returned to the cabin, however, he was in for a shock. As he drove down the road that led to his peaceful retreat, he noticed something strange. His cabin looked different, as though something had been altered. It was subtle, but it caught his eye. The first thing James noticed was the fence around his property. The fence was gone. In its place was a newly marked boundary line that didn't belong to him. Confused and curious, he parked his car and walked up to the cabin, thinking that maybe a storm had caused some damage or that the neighbors were doing some construction work. When he reached the front door, he saw a new for sale sign on the cabin. His heart skipped a beat. He was shocked and confused. How could his cabin be up for sale? Had someone made a mistake? He quickly walked inside, expecting to find some answers. What he found inside was even worse. Everything was in disarray. His personal belongings, once carefully stored and organized, were now in a mess. It was clear that someone had been living there. He felt his chest tighten with anger. It didn't make sense. This was his cabin, his property. He had followed all the rules and regulations set by the HOA. There was no reason for anyone to take this away from him. The confusion quickly turned into frustration. Who would do something like this? And why? James decided to go straight to the HOA office. He needed answers. As he walked through the quiet streets, he couldn't help but feel a sense of betrayal. He had always respected the rules of the neighborhood. He had always paid his dues on time and kept his property in good condition. So why was this happening to him? When James arrived at the HOA office, he was met by a receptionist who looked at him with surprise when he asked to speak to Karen. She told him that Karen was busy, but James wasn't going to leave without answers. He insisted, and after a brief delay, Karen finally came out to see him. Karen, as usual, was dressed in her formal attire, exuding confidence. She greeted James with a smile, but there was something in her eyes that told James this wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. She didn't ask him to sit down. Instead, she stood behind her desk, waiting for him to speak. Karen, James began, trying to keep his voice steady, I just came back from my cabin, and I found that it's been sold. What's going on? Why was my property taken from me? Karen's smile faded slightly, and she leaned forward. James, I think you're mistaken. The cabin isn't yours anymore. It's been given to my son, Brad. He's going to be living there from now on. James stared at her, unable to believe what he was hearing. What do you mean, given to your son? That's my property. You can't just give it away without my permission. Karen's expression didn't change. She was calm, almost too calm. I don't think you understand. The cabin was always intended for Brad. It's been in the family for years, and I had every right to make sure he had it. It's just a small adjustment to the property line. Don't worry, James. He'll take good care of it. James felt his anger rising. You can't do this, Karen. This is illegal. You have no right to give away my property without my consent. This cabin is mine, and I've worked hard to keep it that way. Karen stood her ground, her face hardening. I think you'll find that I do have the right. As president of the HOA, I have the authority to make decisions like this for the good of the community. James was taken aback by her arrogance. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Karen was clearly abusing her power, taking something that didn't belong to her and giving it away as if it were hers to give. He had never imagined that things would come to this, but now he knew that he had no choice but to fight for what was rightfully his. Karen, James said, his voice shaking with frustration, this isn't over. I'm not going to let you get away with this. Karen simply smiled, as if she had already won. We'll see about that, James. As James left the HOA office, he knew that the battle for his cabin was just beginning. He felt a mix of disbelief, anger, and determination. He would not let Karen or anyone else take what belonged to him. He would find a way to get his cabin back, no matter what it took. Let me know if you'd like further edits or adjustments. The days following his encounter with Karen at the HOA office were a blur of frustration and confusion for James. He couldn't understand how the situation had escalated so quickly. He had always thought of the neighborhood as a safe, peaceful place, a place where everyone respected one another. But now, it seemed like everything he knew had been turned upside down. James spent the next few days going over the details of the cabin's ownership in his mind. He had the paperwork proving the cabin was his, every receipt and document to back up his claim. But despite having all the proof, Karen's casual dismissal of his rights made it feel as though he was fighting an impossible battle. Her confidence in what she was doing, her sense of entitlement, made him feel small and helpless. It wasn't just the cabin that bothered him, it was the principle of it. James had always followed the rules of the neighborhood. He had never been one to cause trouble or make waves. But now, he was facing someone who was using their power to take something from him. He couldn't let it stand. James knew he needed to act quickly, but he didn't know where to start. He couldn't just go to the police, they wouldn't be able to help with a property dispute. He thought about talking to a lawyer, but he wasn't sure how much it would cost, and he didn't want to drag the situation out for months or even years. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that Karen was counting on him to back down, to give up and walk away. And he couldn't do that. One afternoon, as James sat by the lake near his cabin, trying to calm his thoughts, he saw a familiar face. It was David, one of his old neighbors, someone who had lived in the area for as long as James could remember. David was a quiet man, always friendly, but he kept to himself most of the time. James had always respected him for his calm and level-headed nature. David walked over to James, his expression serious. Hey, James. I heard about what's been going on with the cabin. You doing okay? James sighed, looking out over the water. Not really. I don't understand what Karen is doing. She just handed my cabin over to her son without asking me, like it's nothing. And now, I'm stuck trying to figure out how to get it back. David nodded, sitting down beside him. I know Karen. She's always been difficult, to say the least. But this is something else. I can't believe she'd do that, especially to someone like you. James felt a mix of relief and disbelief. It was comforting to hear someone else acknowledge what he was going through. I just don't know what to do. I've got all the paperwork. It's mine. But Karen's so sure of herself. She's acting like she has all the power in the world. David thought for a moment, then spoke carefully. You know, you don't have to take this lying down. People like Karen, they're used to getting their way. But you've got rights, James. Don't let her think she can just walk all over you. James looked at him, trying to process what he was hearing. But how do I fight her? She's the president of the HOA. She controls everything around here. David shrugged, a small smile tugging at his lips. Not everything. The thing about people like Karen is that they think they're untouchable. But they're not. You've got the law on your side, and there are ways to challenge her actions. You just need to be smart about it. James felt a spark of hope. You really think I can do something about this? I know you can, David replied firmly. But you've got to show her that you're not going to back down. You've got to hit her where it hurts. James was silent for a long moment, considering David's words. He had never been one to seek confrontation, but this situation was different. He couldn't let Karen get away with this. It wasn't just about the cabin anymore. It was about standing up for himself, for his rights. Thanks, David, James said finally, standing up. I think I know what I need to do. David gave him a reassuring nod. I'm behind you all the way. That evening, James sat down at his kitchen table, surrounded by piles of paperwork. He gathered all the documents that proved the cabin was his: deeds, tax records, utility bills, and started making copies. He also made a list of the HOA rules that Karen had violated by handing over his property without his permission. The more he reviewed the rules, the more he realized how serious the situation was. This wasn't just a personal dispute, it was a matter of legal rights. James knew he needed to get a lawyer involved. But the cost of legal fees was a concern. He had saved up for years to buy the cabin, and he wasn't sure if he could afford a lawyer who could take on someone as powerful as Karen. He made a decision then and there. He would start by writing a formal letter to the HOA, demanding that they acknowledge his ownership and reverse the decision to give the cabin to Brad. He wasn't going to just sit back and wait for Karen to make the next move. The next day, James put his plan into action. He wrote a carefully worded letter, outlining his ownership of the cabin and the legal steps he was prepared to take if the HOA did not rectify the situation. He was firm but respectful, making it clear that he wasn't going to let this slide. When he was finished, he sealed the envelope and walked straight to the HOA office. He handed the letter to the receptionist, making sure she understood how serious he was. As James left the office, he felt a sense of empowerment. For the first time since he discovered what Karen had done, he felt like he was finally taking control of the situation. He didn't know what would happen next, but he was ready for the fight. He wasn't going to let Karen or anyone else take away what was rightfully his. Let me know if you need further changes or adjustments. James felt a strange mix of determination and anxiety as the days passed after sending the letter to the HOA. He knew the fight ahead of him wouldn't be easy, but he wasn't backing down. Every morning, he would wake up and go over the details in his mind. His cabin, his property, was at risk. But he also felt a sense of empowerment. He was doing something about it. For the first time, he wasn't just letting things happen to him. He was taking control. The response from Karen and the HOA came much sooner than James expected. It was a letter, just like his, but this one was from the HOA's legal team. When he opened it, his stomach dropped. The letter was filled with legal jargon, threats of lawsuits, and accusations that James was trying to disrupt the peaceful community they had worked so hard to build. The HOA claimed that Brad's move into the cabin was perfectly within their rights, citing their authority over property transfers and community decisions. It was clear that Karen wasn't going to let this go easily. The letter made it sound like James was the one causing trouble. It claimed that the cabin had been given to Brad for the betterment of the neighborhood, and that James' objections were an unreasonable disruption. James was furious. How could they twist the truth like that? He knew that Karen had made the decision herself, without any consultation with him or even the rest of the HOA. And now, she was trying to make him look like the bad guy, just because he wanted to protect his property. But this wasn't the time to lose his cool. He had to be strategic. He put the letter aside and began researching. James spent hours at his computer, going through HOA laws, property rights, and legal documents. He contacted a few local lawyers and set up meetings. While the legal fees were still a concern, he knew he needed professional help. Every lawyer he spoke to was sympathetic to his case. They explained how the HOA's actions were not only unfair but also likely illegal, given the way they handled the transfer of the property without proper procedures or consent. James wasn't alone in this fight, and that made all the difference. With the advice of the lawyers, James decided to take the next step. He would file an official complaint with the state's Real Estate Commission and the local authorities. He knew this would make the situation more complicated for the HOA, but he was willing to take it that far. It wasn't just about the cabin anymore, it was about standing up to injustice. He wasn't going to let Karen and the HOA push him around. James also reached out to some of his neighbors. He'd been quiet about the situation for a while, but now he needed support. He knew that some of the people in the community were just as upset about Karen's actions as he was. A few of them had already voiced their concerns privately, but James needed to know if he could count on them publicly. So, he hosted a small meeting at his cabin, inviting anyone who felt strongly about the issue to come and discuss it. To his surprise, several neighbors showed up. They were people he had known for years, people who had always seemed to stay out of neighborhood politics. But now, they were all speaking up, sharing their frustrations with the HOA's overreach. One neighbor, Sarah, who lived a few houses down, was especially vocal. "I've lived here for 20 years, Sarah said, her voice filled with anger. Karen's been in charge for too long, and she thinks she can do whatever she wants. But what she did to you, James, that's wrong. She doesn't own the neighborhood. We all do." Others nodded in agreement, and James felt a weight lift off his shoulders. It wasn't just him against the world anymore. There was a small but growing group of people who believed in what he was doing. They all agreed that the HOA was too powerful and needed to be held accountable. Together, they planned their next move. James was also beginning to hear rumors around the neighborhood. Some people, especially those who had always stayed out of HOA matters, were starting to question Karen's leadership. They didn't like how she had handled the situation with the cabin, and many of them were beginning to talk about taking action themselves. It was clear that James wasn't the only one who felt Karen had abused her power. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this fight wasn't just about his cabin, it was about the way the HOA treated the entire community. For the first time in weeks, James felt hopeful. But he also knew the battle was far from over. The HOA wasn't going to give up without a fight. Karen, especially, wasn't someone who took defeat easily. She had a reputation to uphold, and she would do whatever it took to protect her power. One afternoon, a few days after his meeting with the neighbors, James received a phone call. It was a call he hadn't been expecting. It was from Brad, Karen's son, the one who had moved into his cabin. James answered the phone cautiously, not sure what to expect. "Hello," James said. "Hi, James," Brad's voice was surprisingly calm. "It's Brad. I wanted to talk to you about what's going on. I know things are getting tense, but I don't want this to escalate." James was taken aback. He hadn't expected Brad to reach out to him directly. From what he had seen, Brad didn't seem like someone who cared much about the situation, but maybe he was starting to realize how serious things were getting. "I don't want things to escalate either," James replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "But the fact is, you're living in my cabin. Without my permission. I don't know how else to put it. Brad sighed. Look, I didn't ask for this. My mom just made the decision, and I'm just here trying to make the best of it. But I get it. This is your property, and I don't want to be the cause of more trouble for you. James was surprised by Brad's honesty. It was a step in the right direction, but it didn't change the fact that Brad was still in his cabin. I appreciate that, Brad. But it's not just about you. It's about what your mom has done. She can't just hand over my property like it's nothing. It's mine. And I won't let her take it away from me. I understand, Brad said. Maybe we can find a way to make this right. I'll talk to her. But this is messy, and I don't want things to get worse. James didn't know if Brad's words were sincere or if he was just trying to buy some time. But at least he was listening. That was more than James could say for Karen. I hope you do talk to her. Because if this goes any further, I'm not going to back down. After the call, James felt a little more confident. He wasn't sure if Brad would be able to convince his mother to back off, but it was a sign that maybe, just maybe, things were starting to change. James had already made up his mind. He was going to keep fighting for his rights, no matter how long it took. Let me know if you'd like any more adjustments or further details. The weeks that followed James's conversation with Brad were filled with uncertainty and tension. While Brad seemed to be somewhat on his side, Karen remained firmly in control of the HOA. James knew that just talking to Brad wasn't enough, he had to make sure his rights were upheld, and that meant taking the next step. The HOA wasn't just going to hand his cabin back, not without a serious fight. James's lawyer had advised him to file a formal complaint with the state's Real Estate Commission and to involve local authorities to show that he wasn't backing down. He felt nervous but also determined. This wasn't just about the cabin anymore. It was about proving that no one, not even someone as powerful as Karen, could take something from him without consequences. James carefully put together all the necessary paperwork. He made copies of every document that proved the cabin was his, from the deed to tax records, utility bills, and even old letters from when he first bought the cabin. He didn't leave anything out. Each document was like a piece of armor he could use in the fight ahead. One morning, as he was getting ready to mail the complaint, he received an unexpected knock at his door. It was Sarah, one of his neighbors, who had attended his meeting about the cabin. She had always been quiet and kept to herself, but now she was standing at his door with a serious expression on her face. I thought you should know something, Sarah said, glancing around as if making sure no one was watching. There's talk that Karen might be trying to sell the cabin to someone else if you don't act soon. James felt a rush of anxiety. Selling the cabin? That would make everything even more complicated. If Karen could somehow sell it to someone else, he might never get it back. Are you sure about this? James asked, his voice shaking. I heard it from one of the board members at the HOA, Sarah explained, her voice low. They've been talking about making it look like the cabin was never really yours, just to cover their tracks. But I think if enough people speak up, we can stop it from happening. James's heart pounded. He knew that this could be the end of the line if Karen managed to sell the cabin. He couldn't let her get away with this. But he was also aware that time was running out. I need your help, Sarah, James said, his voice filled with urgency. We need to stop her before she sells it to someone else. We can't let that happen. Sarah nodded, determination in her eyes. I'm with you. We've got a lot of neighbors who feel the same way. We'll do what we can. Together, they came up with a plan. They decided to speak with as many people in the neighborhood as possible, telling them what was going on and urging them to support James's fight. Sarah made some calls, while James wrote up a petition that anyone who wanted to support him could sign. The more people they could get behind him, the stronger his case would be. James was amazed by how many neighbors stepped forward to sign the petition. People who had always kept to themselves now spoke out. They didn't like the way Karen had handled things, and they didn't like the way she had taken control of the neighborhood. It was clear that the power of the HOA had gone unchecked for far too long, and now everyone was ready for a change. Within a week, James had a stack of signed petitions, each one showing that the majority of the neighborhood was behind him. He felt a sense of pride and relief he wasn't alone in this fight. He wasn't the only one who had had enough of Karen's actions. The more people who joined in, the more strength he had. But just when things seemed to be turning in his favor, the HOA struck back. One afternoon, he received a letter from Karen, stating that the HOA was filing a lawsuit against him. The letter was filled with threats and accusations, saying that James had violated the community's rules and caused unnecessary trouble. She claimed that his actions were damaging the reputation of the HOA, and that the cabin had always been meant for Brad, even though he had never had any official documentation to back up that claim. Karen's letter was a direct challenge to everything James had worked for. It made him feel like he was back at square one, facing an even bigger battle than before. He couldn't let the HOA intimidate him. This was about his rights, and he wasn't going to let Karen get away with twisting the truth. He met with his lawyer again, feeling more determined than ever. The lawsuit was serious, but it wasn't the end of the line. In fact, it could work to his advantage. His lawyer explained that it was possible to turn the lawsuit into an opportunity to challenge the HOA's authority in court, showing that they had been acting unlawfully. The more legal pressure they put on the HOA, the more likely Karen would be forced to back down. James decided to move forward with the lawsuit, but he also knew he had to make sure everyone in the neighborhood knew the truth. He couldn't let Karen control the narrative. So, he started speaking with the local news, reaching out to reporters who were interested in the story. He wanted the community to know what was happening, not just behind closed doors, but in the open. Soon enough, the media picked up on the story. A local reporter came to James's cabin, taking photos and writing about the situation. The article was published the next day, and before long, people all over town were talking about it. James's fight wasn't just a personal battle anymore, it was a community issue. The people who had once been silent now had a reason to speak up. The press coverage brought more attention to the HOA's shady dealings, and it painted Karen as the villain she had become in the eyes of many. The article also got the attention of a local attorney who specialized in property law. After reading about the case, the attorney offered to represent James pro bono, seeing the injustice in the HOA's actions. This was exactly the kind of case he had been looking for, a chance to stand up against an unfair system and fight for what was right. With the support of the community, the media, and now a top-notch lawyer, James felt more confident than ever. He wasn't going to let Karen win. He was going to fight for his property, his rights, and his community. This wasn't just about getting his cabin back, it was about making sure that no one else in the neighborhood would have to face the same injustice in the future. As the legal battle continued to grow, James knew the road ahead would be long and challenging. But he had something Karen didn't have: the support of the community and the determination to fight until the very end. He wasn't going to stop until he had justice, no matter how many challenges lay ahead. Let me know if you need further edits or more content. The court date was set, and James felt a mixture of anxiety and determination as the day approached. It had been months since he first discovered what Karen had done to his cabin, and the fight had only grown more intense. But James wasn't backing down. He had come too far to quit now. He had the community behind him, his lawyer on his side, and a stack of evidence that proved he was right. But what really kept him going was the belief that no one should have the power to take something that wasn't theirs, especially when it was as personal as his cabin. The day of the hearing, James arrived at the courthouse early. He had never been to court before, so the atmosphere felt intimidating. There were people everywhere: lawyers, reporters, and a few curious onlookers. James tried to stay calm, but the weight of the situation pressed down on him. He had been through so much already, and now, it all came down to this moment. He looked around, trying to find some comfort in the crowd. And then, he saw it. A small group of his neighbors had shown up to support him. Sarah was there, standing near the entrance, and she gave him a reassuring smile when she noticed him. One by one, more neighbors arrived, some with their families, all of them standing by his side. It felt good to know that he wasn't alone in this fight. His neighbors had proven time and time again that they didn't like what Karen had done, and now they were showing up to make a stand. When the court session finally started, the room grew quiet. James sat down in the witness stand, feeling his heart race as he faced the judge. The judge was an older man with a stern expression, but his eyes seemed kind. He listened carefully as James's lawyer laid out the case, presenting the evidence that James had always been the rightful owner of the cabin, and that Karen's actions had violated multiple rules. The lawyer made it clear that the HOA had overstepped its boundaries by giving away property that wasn't theirs to give. On the other side, Karen and her lawyer were ready to defend her actions. They argued that Brad had always been meant to take over the cabin, and that James was causing unnecessary disruption. Karen, sitting in the front row, looked calm but confident, like she was still in control. She had always been the one calling the shots, but now it was clear that she was the one on the defensive. James listened closely as the arguments unfolded. He was amazed by the way his lawyer presented the case, pointing out all the legal flaws in the HOA's actions. But what struck him the most was how much support he had from the community. The lawyer spoke about the petition James had collected, about the neighbors who had spoken out against Karen's abuse of power. The more he heard, the more confident he became. This wasn't just about property rights anymore, it was about fairness, about holding people accountable for their actions. The judge asked Karen a few questions, and it became clear that her story wasn't adding up. She struggled to explain why she had given the cabin to her son without any official documentation or approval from the community. Her answers were vague, and at times, she seemed defensive. James watched her closely, and for the first time, he saw her vulnerability. She wasn't the all-powerful figure she had always seemed. She was just a person, and her actions had consequences. When it was James's turn to speak, he took a deep breath and stood up. He wasn't used to speaking in front of crowds, but this was different. This was his moment to tell the truth. He walked to the stand and looked at the judge, trying to steady his nerves. "Your Honor," James began, his voice firm but calm. "I never thought I would have to be here today. I've lived in this neighborhood for years, and I've always tried to be respectful of the rules. This cabin is my home. It's where I go to escape, to find peace. It's not just a piece of property, it's part of who I am. And I can't let someone take it from me without a fight." He paused, looking around at the faces in the courtroom. What happened here is bigger than just a cabin. It's about fairness. It's about standing up to people who think they can do whatever they want, just because they have power. I've worked hard for everything I have, and I'm not going to let someone take it away from me. James felt a wave of emotion wash over him. For so long, he had felt helpless in the face of Karen's power. But now, he realized that he had the truth on his side. He wasn't alone. His neighbors, the community, and the law were all backing him up. This wasn't just his fight, it was everyone's fight. When James finished, there was a brief silence in the courtroom. The judge looked thoughtful, and James could feel the weight of his words in the air. He had said everything that needed to be said. Now, it was in the judge's hands. After what felt like an eternity, the judge finally spoke. "I've listened to the arguments, and I've reviewed the evidence. This case is about fairness and the rights of property owners. It is clear that James has the legal right to his cabin, and that the actions of the HOA, particularly Karen's decision to give the cabin to her son, were not in line with the law." The judge paused, then looked directly at Karen. The cabin is James's, and the HOA is ordered to correct the records and ensure that James's rights are fully respected. You are to cease all actions that interfere with his ownership of the property. James felt a wave of relief wash over him as the judge finished speaking. He couldn't believe it. He had won. The cabin was his again, and Karen had been forced to answer for her actions. As the courtroom slowly emptied, James's neighbors surrounded him, offering congratulations and hugs. It felt surreal. The fight had been long and difficult, but in the end, justice had prevailed. Karen and her lawyer left the courtroom without a word, their heads down. James watched them go, feeling a sense of satisfaction. This wasn't just about winning a property dispute, it was about standing up for what was right. It was about proving that power and privilege couldn't always win, that fairness and integrity could still prevail. Later that evening, James stood outside his cabin, looking out at the lake. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the water. It was a peaceful moment, one that he had dreamed of for so long. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for everything he had fought for, and for the community that had stood by him. For the first time in months, James could breathe easy again. The cabin was his, and so was his peace of mind. The fight had been hard, but it had been worth it. And as he stood there, looking out over the water, he knew that no matter what came next, he was ready to face it. Because he had learned something important, that standing up for what's right is never easy, but it's always worth it.